The rain came down hard that night. Not the soft kind of rain that taps gently on rooftops and makes you want to sleep. This was violent rain, the kind that comes sideways, that turns roads into mirrors, that makes the whole world feel like it is being washed away whether it agrees or not. Lee Junho was driving too fast. He knew he was driving too fast. He didn't care. Speed was the only thing that quieted the noise in his head, and right now his head was very loud. His father's voice was still in his ears, clear over the sound of the wipers and the rain. Bring home a wife before the end of this year, or you are nothing to me. Nothing. A stranger with our name. Junho's hands were white on the steering wheel. He had sat across from his father at that dinner table for 2 hours, 2 hours of composed silence, of measured responses, of swallowing every real thing he wanted to say. Lee Sung-jae did not argue with people who argued back. He simply made decisions and left them on the table like finished business. This conversation had been finished business before it started. A wife. As if women were things you collected. As if Junho hadn't already learned 3 separate times in 3 separate ways exactly what happened when he let one close. He took the mountain road because it was empty, because the curves required his full attention, and his full attention was the only thing that stopped him from turning the car around and saying things to his father that could not be unsaid. He didn't see the other car until it was too late. It was stopped dead in the middle of the road, a blown tire, a young couple standing in the rain at the roadside, headlights cutting straight into his eyes as he came around the bend. Junho swerved hard. The rain-slicked road gave him nothing. The tires screamed and found no grip, and for 3 slow, terrible seconds the car was simply going wherever it wanted to go. The barrier at the road's edge stopped it. Then everything stopped. He woke to white ceiling, white curtains. The antiseptic smell of a hospital room settling into his lungs before he opened his eyes all the way. For a moment he simply lay there, aware of the sound of a heart monitor and the feeling of his own breathing, and not much else. Then he tried to move his legs. Nothing. He tried again. Focused every instruction downward, the way you focus when you're trying to wake a sleeping limb. Nothing came back. No sensation. No heaviness. No pain even. Just an absence, a silence in the lower half of his body that was somehow louder than any sound in the room. His mother was beside him. She was holding his hand in both of hers, and her eyes were swollen nearly shut, and she was watching his face the way a person watches something precious they are afraid of losing. "Junho," she whispered. "Junho, look at me." He looked at her. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Her grip on his hand tightened until it almost hurt. The doctor came and explained things. Spinal cord. Impact location. The clinical language for permanent. Junho listened to all of it with his eyes on the ceiling and his face very still. When the doctor left, the room was quiet except for the monitor. "Junho," his mother said softly. "Say something." "I'm fine," he said. She started to cry, silently, still holding his hand. He let her, and he stared at the white ceiling and felt, at the very bottom of everything, beneath the shock and the stillness, something he did not expect. Relief. His father arrived 2 hours later. Lee Sung-jae stood at the foot of the bed in his coat, and the man who had never once in Junho's life looked uncertain stood there and looked uncertain. His face did something complicated, tightened, then cracked, then went carefully still in the way of a man who does not know how to fall apart and will not learn today. He sat. He said nothing for a long time. Then, "You will want for nothing. I promise you that." Junho turned his head and looked at his father. He thought of the ultimatum. The wife or nothing. The threat of being erased from everything his father had built. He looked at Lee Sung-jae's face and saw guilt sitting there, heavy and permanent, and he understood something. His father would not mention a wife again. Not now. Maybe not ever. Junho turned his face back to the ceiling. "Good," said the cold, quiet part of him that had learned to survive. 6 weeks in the hospital. Then the family estate. His mother had redesigned his room with a care that made his chest hurt to think about. Wider doorways, a new bed with rails, the bathroom entirely rebuilt. Grab bars everywhere. A roll-in shower with a teak bench. Ramps where steps used to be. She had spent weeks making his world smaller so that he could move through it, and she had done it without being asked, without complaint, and the love in every detail of it was unbearable. He thanked her and moved in, and did not let himself think about it too much. His father visited every evening, sat in a chair beside the window and talked about small things, business, the weather. An old memory from Junho's childhood pulled up carefully, like something fragile. He never mentioned the ultimatum, never mentioned a wife. The guilt had done what Junho needed it to do, and it had done it cleanly. 2 weeks after settling in, the caregivers began. He removed them one by one. Not out of cruelty. He told himself this often enough that it almost felt true. Out of necessity. Every caregiver was a stranger in his house, a new set of eyes, a new set of questions. Each one a risk he could not afford. Mrs. Beck, 3 days. He complained to his mother that the woman's presence raised his stress levels, that stress slowed recovery, that she had to go. The second, 5 days. He moved her things, misplaced her notes, made her feel uncertain until uncertain became unbearable. The third, fourth, fifth variations. He was thorough. He was efficient. By the time the 6th week came around, his mother sat across from him with shadows under her eyes and said, "The agency is hesitating. Junho, please. I am asking you." He said nothing. "One more," she said. "Her name is Lillian. She has never quit an assignment." She looked at him with a mother's quiet, suffering love. "Just try." He looked at his mother's face. "Fine," he said. She came the next morning, and everything, slowly, without his permission, began to change. She walked in at 9 in the morning and changed the air in the room without doing anything dramatic. That was the first thing he noticed. Not her face, not her voice, the air. She carried herself with a settled quality, the way people carry themselves when they are comfortable in their own body and don't need the room to confirm it. Dark green scrubs, natural hair pulled back, warm brown skin, a tote bag on one shoulder. She looked around his room once, taking it in, and her expression was simply interested. Not pitying, not nervous, just interested. "Mr. Lee," she said. "I'm Lillian. I know who you are." "Good." She set her bag down and opened her medical case without waiting to be invited. "Then we can skip the introductions, and I can tell you I've already heard about the 5 people before me." He said nothing. "I'm not here to be the 6th, she said simply. "That will not be your decision." She glanced over her shoulder at him, just briefly, just a look, the kind that takes a full measure of something in 2 seconds. "We'll see," she said, and returned to her work. He spent the rest of the morning watching her and finding nothing to use. She was competent in a way that didn't perform competence. She organized his medications without asking where things went, because she had already looked. She asked him 2 direct questions about his routine and wrote down his answers without adding any softness to the interaction that wasn't needed. She didn't talk too much. She didn't talk too little. And she did not look at him with pity. Not once. He had been looked at with pity every day for 6 weeks. By doctors, nurses, his parents, the household staff, his father's associates who stopped by to pay careful respects. He had learned to hate that look with a specific, thorough hatred. Lillian simply looked at him, like a person looks at another person. It was the most disarming thing anyone had done to him in months. The first bath was on the 2nd morning. She came in at 10 with towels over her arm, ran the water, tested it with her wrist. Then she moved to his wheelchair and said, "Ready?" in a practical tone, and helped him transfer to the shower bench. Her technique was good. Firm hands, sure grip. She positioned herself to take his weight properly, her arm coming around his back, his hand on her shoulder, and for a moment they were close in the way that care requires, her face near his jaw, her warmth a solid presence beside him. He kept his lower body perfectly still. She settled him on the bench, made one small adjustment to how he was sitting, her hand briefly on his hip, repositioning, and stepped back. "Tell me if the water's too hot," she said. "It's fine." She began with his hair. The handheld shower head sending warm water across his scalp, her fingers working shampoo through with steady, even movements. He stared at the tile and kept his breathing regular. Her hands were careful, not overly gentle, Not the fragile, walking on eggshells kind of care he'd had from others. Just thorough. Like she was paying attention. She rinsed the shampoo, and then her hands moved to his back, the cloth moving in long strokes across his shoulders and down his spine, and Junho gripped the bench edge and looked at the wall and thought about absolutely nothing. This was the routine. 10 o'clock every morning. Towels. Water. Her hands. The specific, unavoidable intimacy of it. By the third morning, he had cataloged exactly how much of his focus it required to stay still. By the fifth, he had stopped being able to think about other things during it. The sixth morning, the light came through the frosted window in a way that turned the steam golden, and Lillian was washing his hair and humming something low and soft under her breath, not performing it, just the sound a person makes when they are at ease, and Junho felt something shift in his chest that he did not have a name for. Her fingers moved through his hair slowly. She had learned by now how he preferred it, less pressure at the temples, more at the back where the tension collected. She had not been told this. She had worked it out herself, one session at a time, and the fact that she had paid that much attention sat in him like a small, inconvenient fire. "You're less tense today," she said. "I'm not tense." "You're less of what you call not tense then." A quiet note of amusement in her voice, not mean, just accurate. He said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved. On the 8th morning, she was washing his back and said quietly, almost to herself, "You have a scar here, old one." "Childhood," he said. "What happened?" "Fell out of a tree." "How old?"
8.
She didn't say anything else, but her cloth slowed, briefly at the scar, not dramatically, just a half-second of extra care, the way a person's hands naturally give more attention to a mark of old pain. Something about that small, unconscious tenderness hit him somewhere he was not prepared for. He focused hard on the tiles. Then on the 9th morning the water turned cold. It happened suddenly. A burst from the pipes, ice cold against his lower back, and his body reacted before his brain could catch it. His right knee drew up. His left foot shifted on the bench tile. He corrected in under a second, went absolutely still. The hands in his hair paused. 1 beat.
2.
Then they continued, smoothly, as though nothing had happened. Junho stared at the wall, with his heart moving fast. She rinsed his hair. She helped him transfer back to the wheelchair with her arm around his back and his hand on her shoulder. That same position, close, warm, her hair near his cheek. She adjusted his posture in the chair, and her hand lingered one moment on his shoulder before she stepped back and handed him his towel. "I'll be outside," she said. He sat in the steamed bathroom alone. She had felt it. He knew she had felt it. The question was what she would do with it. The days built on each other, and the tension built with them. He began to dread the mornings. He began to look forward to the mornings. He was not sure which of those things was more honest. She painted in his room in the afternoons, and he watched her from behind his book, not reading. She moved the brush with her whole hand, not just her wrist, a full, committing motion that he found, for reasons he couldn't explain cleanly, completely absorbing. She tilted her head at the canvas the same way every time, slightly left, when she was deciding something. "The light on the doorway is wrong," he said one afternoon. She looked at him over her shoulder. "What's wrong with it?" "The source. You've painted midday light, but the shadow says morning. They're fighting each other." She looked at her canvas for a long moment. Then she held out the brush.
He looked at it.
He had not held a brush in almost 2 years. He had locked that part of himself away, with everything else he couldn't afford to want. And yet his hand moved toward it before he had made the decision. He stopped himself. "Fix the angle," he said. "Tilt the shadow 11 degrees left." She turned back to the canvas without argument and adjusted it. Exactly right. He watched her work and said nothing, and felt the locked-away part rattle against its door. The physical therapy sessions were their own particular problem. She worked close during those, kneeling beside the wheelchair to position his arm, standing behind him to check his posture, her hands on his shoulders, his back, his forearms. She was completely professional about it. That was almost the issue. Her professionalism was total, and it made no allowance for the fact that her hands on his body were slowly, methodically dismantling his ability to think clearly. One session, she stood directly behind him, both hands on his shoulders, guiding him through a resistance exercise. Her chin was level with the top of his head. He could feel the warmth coming off her through the fabric of his shirt. "Breathe," she said. He had not been breathing. He breathed. Her hands moved slightly on his shoulders, a small adjustment, and the movement was so deliberate and so gentle that he closed his eyes for 1 second that he could not take back. She moved around to his right side and said, "Other arm," in a perfectly steady voice. He lifted the other arm. Neither of them said anything about the 1 second. At night they sat with tea and talked, and the talking became the thing he moved toward all day. She asked him questions no one else asked, not about his father's business, not about the accident, not about his condition or his future or his medical needs. She asked him which painter he would be if he could only choose one for the rest of his life. She asked him whether he thought loneliness was a feeling or a habit. She asked him if he had ever cooked for anyone he actually loved. He answered all of it. Slowly, carefully, the way a man answers when he is realizing he hasn't spoken his real thoughts out loud in a very long time. One evening she was reaching past him to adjust the lamp angle, and her arm crossed in front of his chest, her wrist briefly against his collarbone. She went still for a half second, just half, before pulling back. He caught her scent as she moved away, shea butter and warm skin, and something underneath that was simply her, and he held it in his lungs longer than he should have. Another evening she was sitting on the floor against the wall. She liked sitting on the floor, he had come to know, with her tea and her knees drawn up, and he was in the chair nearby, and the conversation had gone quiet in the comfortable way it sometimes did between them, and he looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and the distance was not enough. She looked back at the window. He looked at the ceiling. Neither of them moved, and the space between them vibrated with everything they were not saying. Tuesday morning. Gray light. She was washing his hair, and he had made the mistake, again, the same mistake, of being comfortable. He had relaxed into it, into her hands and the warm water and the quiet, the way you relax into something when your body has decided it is safe regardless of what your head says. Her phone buzzed on the shelf. His whole body turned toward the sound,
not just his head and shoulders.
His legs shifted, both of them responding to the noise, the natural automatic movement of a man whose body works the way bodies are supposed to work. He caught it in less than a second. The hands in his hair went still. 1 beat.
2.
3. Then they continued. She finished the session. She helped him transfer back. Her arm came around his back, his hand to her shoulder. That same closeness, except now it felt different, charged with what had just happened, with what she now knew she knew. Her hand was warm through his shirt. He could feel her breathing. She settled him in the chair and handed him his towel without looking directly at his face.
"I'll be outside," she said.
He sat alone in the bathroom with the water still running.
He should move her out now. Today.
Before she said it, he had a plan. He always had a plan, and the plan said, remove the threat, stay ahead of it. He sat in the steamed bathroom and thought about her hands in his hair and could not make himself reach for the plan. When he came out, she was at the medication tray. "You're quiet this morning," he said. "I'm always quiet in the mornings." She turned. Her face was composed. Her eyes were full of thought. She went to her easel and picked up her brush and began to paint, and Junho sat very still and watched her back and understood that she was giving him 2 more days. He had no idea what to do with that kindness. Thursday afternoon. He was standing at the window. He did it sometimes when the room was empty, stood up and stretched, let his back remember what it was. Just 30 seconds, 40 at most. He had checked the hallway. He had checked the garden. He had not checked the garden path. The side door opened. He was back in the chair before she fully entered, smooth, fast, but fast was wrong. A man with no use of his legs did not drop back into a wheelchair in one clean motion. Lillian stood in the doorway with yellow flowers in her hand. She was very still. She walked in slowly and put the flowers and the glass of water on his desk. She set down her scissors with a small, careful sound. She turned and looked at him, and her face had let go of the professional mask. What was underneath it was complicated and quiet, and it looked, if he had to be honest, like something breaking.
"You can walk," she said.
The room was so quiet he could hear the garden through the window. He thought about all the walls he had available, all the versions of denial. He looked at her face, at the specific expression on it, the one that was not anger, not betrayal, but something that looked like a person who had brought their real self somewhere and found out the floor wasn't solid, and the walls felt small. Yes, he said. She exhaled slowly. The accident. Arranged. She put one hand on the desk behind her, steadying herself. Your father, she said. His ultimatum. A wife or nothing. He kept his voice even. I could not say no to him. I could not go through it again what he was asking of me. So I said no another way. Lillian looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were doing something complicated. Then she said, very quietly, I have bathed you every morning, Junho. I have held you, moved you, been careful of your body like it was something I was trusted with. Her voice stayed level, but it was carrying weight. I sat with you at night, and I talked to you like you were the most real person in this house. I showed you my work. I told you things. She paused. And every single morning while I was taking care of you, you were? Fine, he said. I know. You were fine, she said. And you let me, she stopped. Pressed her lips together. You let me care. Junho said nothing. There was no clean answer to that. He had enough respect for her not to reach for an unclean one. I'm sorry, he said. It came out simply, without anything attached to it. He was not sure he had said those two words in that tone of voice to anyone in 2 years. Lillian looked at him for one more long moment. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. He let her go and sat in the quiet room with the flowers she had put in water still sitting on his desk and felt the specific weight of a man who has done a true wrong to a good person. She came back that evening at 8:30. She knocked. He said, come in. She entered in a plain black dress, her hair down around her shoulders, and she was carrying a thin folder that she held with both hands the way you hold something that matters. She sat across from him and placed the folder on her knee and looked at him with clear, direct eyes. I need money, she said. Junho was quiet. I'm not here to hurt you, she said. I need you to understand that first. This is not about revenge for what you did. She opened the folder. A single sheet, a loan document, the kind issued by companies that know their clients have no other options. The number at the top made his jaw tighten slightly. The interest structure below, it was worse. My mother has been sick for 2 years. Kidney disease. The treatment in Nigeria costs more than I earn in 4 months. I came here because this work pays better than anything at home. I have been sending money back every single month. She paused. Last month I missed a payment. The interest doubled overnight. If I miss again, what we owe will be more than I can recover from in 2 years of working. She closed the folder. You pay me what I'm asking, she said steadily. 1 payment, enough to clear the debt and give us room to breathe. In return, what I know stays between us. I stay here, I do my job, and your life continues exactly as it is. Junho looked at her. And if I say no, then I go to your father's study in the morning. He turned toward the window. His parents' wing. The light was on. His father would be at his desk, working through papers, carrying the slow guilt that had softened him these past weeks. If Lillian walked in there tomorrow morning, everything went.
The lie.
His father's trust. Whatever thin, complicated thread still connected them. He turned back. How much, he said. She told him. He studied her face. The number was real, precise, not inflated. She had calculated exactly what she needed, and not one more. It was the number of a woman solving a problem, not taking an opportunity. Something about that hit him differently than he expected. He had been blackmailed before, in a manner of speaking, not with information, but with care, with pretended love, with warmth that was really just a hand reaching into his pocket. This was different. This was a woman who had a mother who was sick and a debt that was eating her alive and not enough options, and she was using the only card she had been dealt with clean, clear-eyed directness. He respected it more than he wanted to.
Friday, he said.
Wire transfer. She nodded. Conditions. He leaned forward. The arrangement stays as it appears. You are my caregiver. You tell no one. Not family, not friends, not anyone. Agreed.
And you, he paused.
This next part was harder to say. I want to explain myself tonight. Not to earn forgiveness. Not to make what I did acceptable. He looked at his hands. Just so that someone in this house knows the real version of what is happening. Lillian was still for a moment. And why me? She said. He looked up at her. Because you're the only real thing in it. The room was quiet. Something moved through her expression. Not quite softness, not quite surrender. Something more private than either. I'll get the tea, she said. The lamps were low. Outside the window, the estate was dark and still. Junho talked and Lillian listened, and she had the particular gift of listening without performing it. No soft sounds, no nodding on schedule. Just present. Just there. He told her about Yuna first. He had been young enough to believe that love was a neutral thing, that if you gave it honestly you got something honest back. Yuna was bright and interesting, and she had looked at him like he was worth knowing, and he had given her everything that deserved the word trust in him. 2 years in, he found her phone. He had not been looking. He saw it by accident, and what was on it rearranged his understanding of the previous 2 years completely. She had been keeping records. His habits. His family's business details. His father's schedules and contacts. She had been cataloging him like a resource. She never cared about me, he said. Not once. The whole time. He looked at his hands. The part that was hardest was that I had given her things I had never given anyone. Things I thought were safe with her. And she was taking notes. Lillian held her mug and said nothing. So-Yun came after. He was slower. More careful. He thought careful meant safe. So-Yun sold information to a business competitor. 6 months of private conversations. Details about his family's operations. Names and numbers that should never have left that house. His father lost 3 major contracts. Lee Sung-jae sat across from him the day it came out and said nothing, and the silence was more damaging than anything his father could have said out loud. I had brought someone dangerous in, Junho said. Into my father's house, his business, his world. He had trusted me to be careful, and I had not been careful enough. He was quiet for a moment. After that I was done. I thought. Jiun was the last one and the most efficient in her damage. She had not wanted him at all. Only the family name, the power, the access to Lee Sung-jae's world. She had been perfectly pleasant about it, warm even, right up to the moment she wasn't. 3 women, he said. 3 different ways to be taken apart. He looked at the window. I am not saying they broke me. I'm saying they showed me something I can't unsee. That when people look at me they see the family, the money, the name. There is no version of me that exists separately from what I come from. So when your father said bring home a wife, Lillian said, he might as well have put me back at the table with all 3 of them at once. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him. I haven't asked you about your family, she said. Your money, what you're worth or who your father is. Not once. I know, he said. You noticed. The second day you were here. He looked at her steadily. It was the first time in a very long time that I didn't feel like an inventory being taken. She looked at him with an expression that was open in a way that made him feel uncomfortably seen. Do you know why I stayed? She said. After you tried every single thing to make me leave. Tell me. Because underneath all of it you were trying, she said.
Badly.
Cruelly, some of it. But it was all just a man trying very hard not to be hurt again. She tilted her head slightly. That I understood. Junho looked at her for a long moment. Your mother, he said. Tell me about her. Lillian's face changed, softened, but in a way that had grief in it. She told him. Her mother had gotten sick quietly, the way strong women get sick, pretending it was manageable until it was not. The diagnosis came late. The treatment was expensive, and Lagos was not kind about expensive. Lillian had been painting, trying to build something with her work, and she had packed it up and come here because here meant enough money, and enough money meant her mother lived. So you came to a foreign country and took difficult cases that other people ran from, he said. I came where the money was.
She paused.
But yes, that too. And then you ended up here. And then I ended up here. She looked at him. With you. The last 2 words were simple. Not romantic, not loaded. Just accurate. Honest the way she was honest about everything. Junho sat with them and felt something he had spent 2 years burying push upward through the weight. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said. "And I will pay the debt. All of it. Friday." "I know," she said. "Thank you." They sat in the quiet together until the tea went cold, and neither of them rushed it. Something changed between them the next day. Not dramatically. Not with a conversation that announced it. Just the texture of the air between them was different, the way air changes after a storm. Things that had been tight were slightly looser. Things that had been unsaid had been said. She came for the bath at 10, and Junho wheeled himself to the bathroom, and the routine began, and it was the same as always on the surface. But when she helped him transfer to the bench, her arm around his back, his hand on her shoulder, neither of them made the usual quick, efficient separation after he was seated. She was close. Right there. He could feel the warmth coming off her skin, and she was looking at the water controls, and her profile was a foot from his face, and the moment stretched several seconds longer than it needed to before she stepped back. She cleared her throat softly. "Water's good." "Yes," he said. She began. Shampoo, her fingers through his hair, and today there was a quality to it that was different, still professional, still careful, but something in the slowness of it. She was not rushing. She worked from the front of his hairline back, and her fingertips pressed gently against his scalp, and Junho looked at the tiles and quietly clenched his jaw. When she moved to his back, the cloth strokes were the same long, even movements they always were, but at his shoulder she paused, and her hand, the one not holding the cloth, rested briefly on the ball of his shoulder. Flat.
Warm. Still.
Not a medical touch. Just a touch. He did not move. She moved on. When she helped him transfer back to the wheelchair, his hand went to her shoulder, and her arm came around him, and for those few seconds of movement, her face was against his jaw, and he turned his head slightly. Not much, not enough to make it anything, just enough to feel the warmth of her hair. She settled him in the chair, and stepped back, and her eyes found his for one moment. "Good," she said, like always. "Good," he agreed, like nothing had happened. But they both knew. He asked to hold the brush on a Wednesday. He did not announce it or explain it. She was painting and he was across the room, and he simply said, "Give me that." She turned and looked at him. Her expression was careful. She knew what this was. She understood what it meant for him to ask, and she brought the brush over without comment and placed it in his hand. It felt like something coming back to life. He held it for a moment. Then he said, "Will me over," and she pushed the chair to her easel, and he looked at the canvas she was working on, a doorway scene, a woman in a market, and he saw where her instinct had gotten it right, and where her technique had gotten in the way. He fixed one shadow, then another. She stood beside the wheelchair and watched, her arm resting on the back of his chair, her face near his shoulder, and neither of them spoke for 20 minutes. He worked and she watched, and it was the most natural, most alive he had felt in 2 years. When he set the brush down, she leaned forward to look at what he had done, and in doing so her cheek came level with his, the warmth of her face right beside his face, and she was looking at the canvas, and he was looking at her profile at very close range, and the moment held itself perfectly still. "That's beautiful," she said. "The painting or my correction," he said. She turned her head. Their faces were very close. Her eyes were warm brown and direct and completely unafraid. "Both," she said. He looked at her mouth for 1 second. She stepped back and picked up her own brush. He sat with his heart beating slightly too fast and said nothing and looked at the painting. It happened in small pieces, his falling. He wouldn't have called it falling, he would have called it losing ground if he was being cold about it. But honesty required him to admit, at some point in the 4th week, that he had already lost the ground and was now simply walking around in a different landscape. The first piece, he noticed that his mornings now oriented around 10 o'clock. Not in an anticipating way, he told himself. Practically. The bath was at 10. That was simply when his day organized itself. The second piece, he had started painting again in the evenings after she sat up beside him. He had her pull the second easel from the storage room, and now they painted side by side in the afternoon light, and he taught her things, technique, shadow, the way color behaves in heat versus cold light, and she listened and argued with him sometimes, and he discovered that her arguing was one of his favorite things. The third piece, her laugh. She laughed from low in her chest, not the surface laugh of someone performing amusement. When something was genuinely funny to her, it came out real and full, and she didn't apologize for the size of it. And the first time he heard it, really heard it, aimed at something he said, he felt it land somewhere and stay. The fourth piece was the worst one. He had been awake late one night, unable to sleep, sitting in the dark, when he heard her moving quietly down the hall. She stopped at his door. She didn't knock. She just stopped, as if checking whether the light was on, whether he was all right. Then she moved on. He sat in the dark and understood that she had been doing that every night, checking, quietly, without announcement, without requiring anything from him for the information. He sat with that for a long time. He was in serious trouble. He sent the wire transfer on Friday morning. She was in the kitchen when he told her it was done, making tea, and she turned and looked at him with an expression that had relief in it and something harder to name. "It went through," she said. By this afternoon. She turned back to the kettle. Her hands were still on the counter. "Thank you," she said quietly to the window. "For my mother." Junho sat in the doorway and watched her back and felt the specific tenderness of knowing someone's real thing, the thing underneath all the confidence and the stillness and the professional calm, the thing she was actually made of. "Tell me about her," he said. "Your mother. What is she like?" She looked over her shoulder at him, surprised. "Stubborn," she said after a moment. "Loudly opinionated about everything. Terrible at taking help." A small sound that was almost a laugh. "She would hate that I needed to do this." "She sounds," Junho said carefully, somewhat familiar. Lillian turned and looked at him. "Are you saying I'm like her?" "I'm saying the stubbornness is perhaps genetic." She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed, that real one, the full one, from her chest, and turned back to the tea, and Junho sat in the doorway and let it fill the room and thought, there it is. There is the fourth piece, right there, undeniable. 3 weeks after the payment, a storm came. Not the quiet kind, the dramatic kind. Thunder that came in long rolling waves, lightning that turned the whole garden white for 1 second at a time, rain like something personal and determined. The power in the estate went twice, briefly, before the generator took over with its low hum. Junho was at his desk. He heard her door. Her room was directly beside his. Open and then pause. He called, "I'm awake." A small silence. Then, "So am I." Another silence. He said, "The lamp's on." She came in. She was in a loose white shirt and sleep shorts, and her hair was out, fully out, the way he had never quite seen it, thick and natural and full around her face, and she looked softer in sleep clothes, the professional armor set aside, and she stood in the doorway and looked at him, and they both were quiet for a moment. "The thunder woke you?" he asked. "I don't like storms." A pause. "I'm not afraid. I just don't like them." "There's a difference." "Yes."
"Sit," he said.
She sat on the chair she always used and pulled her knees up to her chest, and they watched the lightning through the window together. He had not stood up all day, had been in the chair consistently for the first time in a while, not because he needed to but because she was in the room. "Junho," she said, during a long quiet stretch between rolls of thunder. "What do you want? In your actual life. Not your father's version. Yours." He was quiet for a moment. "To paint," he said. "Seriously. I was good, and I stopped and I think about it." A pause. "A house that is quieter than this one. Work that I chose instead of inherited." He looked at the window. "Someone to eat dinner with who says real things." She was quiet. "Someone like you, probably," he said, and it came out simpler and more direct than he had planned it, and he could not take it back, and he didn't try to. The lightning lit the room white for one long moment. Lillian uncurled from the chair slowly. She came to where he was sitting, not the wheelchair. He was on the armchair by the desk, and she stopped in front of him and looked down at him with her face open and her eyes doing that thing they did where they were entirely, uncomplicatedly honest. He reached up and took her hand. She looked at their hands, then at his face. "I don't want to be a decision you make in a difficult moment," she said. Her voice was quiet and serious. I've been used as a solution before. I won't do it again. You are not a solution, he said. You are the only person in my life in a very long time who I have wanted to be near for no strategic reason. He looked up at her. That is a terrifying sentence for me to say. I want you to understand that. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. Then she sat on the arm of the chair beside him and leaned against him, her head resting against his temple, and his arm went around her waist, and they sat together and watched the storm move across the garden while the thunder rolled and the lightning went on painting the world white, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else was needed. Everything and nothing. She still kept the professional structure during the day, medications, the bath, the exercises, because they were still in his parents' house, and the world still understood her as his caregiver. But in the evenings and in the quiet parts of the day, the distance was simply gone. They painted together every afternoon, side by side, close enough that their arms sometimes crossed when they reached. He taught her glazing technique, and she argued with him about color choices, and he told her she was wrong, and she told him he was stuck in classical thinking, and they were both right about parts of it. He stood up in front of her now without hesitation, would walk to the window, to the desk, to the kitchen when the mood took him, and she would watch him move with an expression that was still slightly wondering, like she was not entirely finished adjusting to the real version of him. One morning during the bath, she still kept the bath, still arrived with towels at 10, and he sat on the bench because sitting there meant she was close. She was washing his hair, and he took her hand from his head and held it. Just held it. Turned it over and looked at it. She was very still. He ran his thumb across her palm, slowly, looking at her hand like he was studying it. You have paint in 3 places, he said. I know, she said. Her voice was slightly different from usual. He turned her hand over and held it against his cheek for a moment. Just one moment. Then he let go and said, continue, like absolutely nothing had happened. She took 3 seconds before she continued. He closed his eyes and let her wash his hair and was, for the first time in a very long time, something close to peaceful. It was a slow evening in the 5th week. His parents had gone to visit family for the weekend. The household staff had retired by 9. The estate was theirs in the way large houses become yours when all the people who make them formal have gone to bed. They had dinner together. She had cooked something rich and spiced that she said was her mother's recipe, and they ate at the small table by his window instead of the formal dining room and talked about painting and her childhood in Lagos and the one time, age 9, he had run away from home and made it exactly 4 blocks before his father's driver found him. She laughed at that story, the full laugh, and he watched her laugh and felt the thing he had been calling by careful neutral names sit up in him and announce its real name. He loved her. He didn't say it yet. He sat with it. Let it be real before he offered it out loud. After dinner they were on the small sofa by the window and the night was warm and she had her feet tucked under her and her head was on his shoulder and his arm was around her and neither of them was watching the film he had put on because neither of them was actually thinking about the film. He turned toward her. She looked up. He kissed her. Softly at first. Carefully. The way you kiss something you have been waiting for long enough that you want to feel every second of it. She kissed him back with one hand coming up to the side of his face and he pulled her closer and the kiss changed. Warmer, longer, the full weight of 5 weeks of small distances finally becoming no distance at all. When they pulled back, she looked at him with color on her cheeks and her hand still on his jaw, and her eyes were saying something that matched everything in him. He stood up. She looked at him standing. She still did that, still took a half second to adjust. And he held out his hand and she took it and stood with him, and the height difference settled into place, her face tilted up, his head bent down, and he said her name once, just her name. Lillian. I know, she said. I know. He took her face in his hands and kissed her again, and she wrapped her arms around him and held on like she had decided, and she had. He could feel the decision in how she held him, certain and real. They stayed. The night was long and warm and entirely their own. The announcement came the following Thursday. His father appeared with the look of a man who had solved something and wanted credit for it. A woman named Park Soo-yeon. Good family. She knew his situation. She was arriving Sunday for a few weeks. The East guest room, his father said. It is time, Junho. A good woman does not run from difficulty. He left. Junho sat very still. Lillian appeared in the doorway. She had heard all of it. She looked at him with level eyes. How bad, she said. Complicated, he said. She will be watching. My father will be hopeful. Hopeful means he looks too closely at everything. He looked at Lillian. And there is quite a bit now that I would rather he not look at closely. Something moved in her face. Not jealousy, something quieter. What do you want to do? I want to know who she is, he said. Before I decide anything. Soo-yeon arrived in a cream coat and a practiced smile, and she was beautiful in a very deliberate way. Junho watched her at dinner.
She said, perfect things.
She listened with performed attention. She touched his mother's arm at the right moment and laughed at his father's story at the right moment and turned her warm eyes to Junho at regular intervals. He had met this person before. Not this woman specifically. This person. The one who had learned which face to wear in which room and wore each one flawlessly. After dinner, she took his wheelchair handles without asking. He felt Lillian's eyes on his back from across the room. You don't need to be tense, Soo-yeon said softly as she guided him down the hallway. I'm not tense. I know how this looks. Her voice dropped into an intimacy she had not earned. I want you to know I'm not like what you're probably thinking. And what am I probably thinking? That I'm here for your family's name. A small laugh, light and self-aware. I'm not. He said nothing. Behind them, Lillian's footsteps followed at the correct professional distance, steady and even. Lillian came to him late that night, after Soo-yeon's light had gone out. I was on the 3rd floor, she said, and he knew from her face it was not a casual thing she had come to say. The ventilation shaft between the storage hall and the east guest room. You heard a phone call. A long one. She sat down. She was talking to a man, not family. She called him Appa. The comfortable kind, not the respectful kind.
She paused.
She told him to be patient. Said it wouldn't take long. Said they would have everything they needed. Junho was very still. His name. Kong. He turned to the window. The estate was dark except for the single garden light his mother always left on. She came to marry the Lee name, he said, and she brought the man she actually wants waiting in the background. Lillian watched him carefully. You were ready to believe it. And I was right. He looked at her. But you were right too. I was ready. He looked at his hands. I am always ready. I do not know how to be any other way. I know, she said softly. He looked at her across the room. This woman who had blackmailed him and bathed him and argued with him about color theory and fallen asleep on his shoulder during a storm and meant more to him than he had allowed anyone to mean in years. She will hurt my father, he said. Yes. He brought her here because he wants something good for me, and she is using that. Lillian was quiet. I cannot let that happen, he said. 3 nights later she appeared at his door again with that same look. He's here, she said. The man Kong had come through the staff entrance with a small bag. Junho sat with the confirmation of it settling into place. Sit down, he said. Let's talk about what happens next. Junho stood up and walked to his desk and Lillian, by now, watched him rise without the wondering pause. It was simply him, the version of him she knew. She will relax if she thinks I'm warming to her, he said. Women who believe a plan is working move more freely. She'll cut corners. You want to pretend. Just enough. Small warmth. Nothing that commits to anything. He looked at Lillian. And you watch her. You see things I miss. I always have, she agreed. He looked at her. After this. Don't, she said. Do this first. Then after. He nodded. The plan was careful and patient. Junho began showing the smallest warmth towards Soo-yeon at dinner. Not enthusiasm, nothing his father would make too much of, just the slight softening of a man beginning to consider something. Soo-yeon responded exactly as predicted. She relaxed. She got comfortable. She got careless. On the 9th day, Lillian confirmed the man had come again. 2nd floor. Staff entrance. No one had seen him. On the 11th day, Junho had a quiet word with one of the household staff he trusted, redirected his father's usual evening walk route through the East Wing. On the 12th day, Lee Sung-jae opened a corridor door and stopped. He did not make a sound. He stood there for several seconds and then he turned and walked back the way he had come, and his footsteps down the hallway were the heaviest Junho had ever heard them. Soo-yeon was gone by the next morning. No explanation was offered to Junho. He did not ask for one. His father came to his room that evening and sat in the chair by the window and was quiet for a very long time. "I wanted something good for you," his father finally said. His voice was different, smaller than usual, like something had gone out of it. "I know what you thought," Junho said. "I was careless." His father looked at his hands. "I did not look carefully enough." "You wanted to believe it would be simple," Junho said. "It isn't simple." A pause. "It has never been simple for me." His father looked at him, really looked the way he rarely did. "What will make you happy?" he said. And it was not the way Lee Sung-jae usually asked questions, which was mostly asking you to confirm what he had already decided. It was a real question. Junho looked at his father's face, older than he sometimes remembered, heavier with things carried, and said what was true. "I have someone," he said. His father was still. "She is not what you arranged," Junho continued. "She is not from a family you would have chosen. You'll have opinions about it, and I am telling you in advance that my answer to those opinions will be the same regardless of what they are." A very long silence. "Show me," his father said, "that she is good to you." "She is the best thing in this house," Junho said. "She has been for months." His father said nothing more. He stood and straightened his jacket and walked out, and his silence was not agreement, but it was not the door slamming shut either. She came to his room the next morning. Mrs. Lee sat across from her son with her hands in her lap and looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had been paying attention for a very long time.
"Lillian," she said.
Junho looked at his mother. "I am not blind, Junho. I am your mother." She tilted her head slightly. "How long?" He was quiet for a moment. "A while." She looked at the window, then back at him. "She never ran," she said. "Not once. Every person you chased out of this house, she stayed."
She paused.
"I noticed that." "Yes." "She looks at you like you are worth the trouble," she said softly. "Do you know how rare that is?" Junho looked at his hands. "Your father will struggle," his mother said. "You know his thinking. He has a picture in his head of what the family should look like." "I know." She reached across and put her hand over his. "I want you to be happy," she said. "That is all I have ever wanted from any of this." Her eyes were bright. "If she makes you happy, the real kind, the kind I can see when you don't know I'm looking, then I am on your side. Completely." Junho looked at his mother's face and felt something he had been carrying for a long time set itself down. "Thank you," he said. She squeezed his hand and stood. "Tell her I'd like to take tea with her tomorrow," she said. "Properly. Just us." She walked out. Junho sat in the quiet room and felt the world, very slightly, reorganize itself. He found Lillian in the garden that afternoon. She was sitting on the low stone wall with her sketchbook on her knee, drawing the far trees where they met the gray afternoon sky. Her feet were bare on the grass. Her hair was free. She did not look up immediately when he came. She was in the middle of something and she finished it before she gave him her attention, which was one of his favorite things about her. He was walking, freely walking, across the open garden in the afternoon light, and she looked up and watched him come, and her expression was, it was always something, when she watched him walk. Like she was still deciding if she was happy about it or just surprised by it. "Sit," she said, making room on the wall. He sat beside her.
"Close."
Their arms touching. "My mother wants to have tea with you," he said. She looked at him. "Your mother?" "Tomorrow," she said properly. Lillian processed this. "She knows." She noticed. "Apparently, several weeks ago." He paused. "She said she could tell when I wasn't looking." Lillian looked at the trees. A small sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, something warmer. "My father is difficult," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise. He has a picture of what things should look like, and you are not in that picture. He will make his feelings known." "I know. I am telling you that his feelings are not mine." He turned and looked at her. "His picture is not mine. It never was." He looked at her steadily. "You are the person I want. That is simple for me, even if nothing around it is. Lillian looked at him for a long moment.
Junho, she said.
Yes. Stop talking and let me draw. He looked at her. The corner of her mouth was moving. He took her free hand from the wall and held it in his, and she leaned her head briefly against his shoulder before straightening back up and returning to her sketch. Their hands joined between them, and he sat in the garden beside her and watched the trees she was drawing and felt something in him that had been clenched for 2 years simply. Open. He asked her 2 weeks later. Not with a grand gesture. Not in front of people. They were in his room, their easels side by side, the afternoon light coming in wide and gold, both of them painting and not talking. The kind of quiet that belongs to people who have been together long enough to be easy. He set his brush down. She didn't look up immediately.
Still in the middle of something.
Lillian. Marry me. She looked up. He looked back at her. Steady. Certain. Your father, she started, will not be the one married to you. She looked at him for a long moment. Junho, she said. I came to this house to care for a man who turned out to be lying about everything, and then I blackmailed him, and then I fell in love with him, and now he is asking me to marry him in a room covered in paint. She paused. This is not a normal story. No, he agreed. Your father will be difficult. Yes. And my mother will be happy. And I will be, he paused. Something moved in his face. I will be complete. In a way I did not think I was going to get to be. Lillian looked at him. She looked at the painting on her easel. She looked at him again. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, to make sure. Okay, she confirmed.
Yes.
I'll marry you. He took her face in his hands and kissed her, and she laughed against his mouth, and held on and knocked her paintbrush off the easel, and neither of them stopped to pick it up. The ceremony was small. Not because Junho lacked resources, but because both of them agreed, without much debate, that a small thing was a real thing, and they wanted it real. A garden ceremony in the estate grounds.
20 people.
His mother in the front row in a soft blue dress, her eyes wet from before the ceremony even started. A smile on her face so unguarded that Junho, walking out and seeing it, had to look away for a moment. His father sat beside her. His face was complicated. The face of a man who had not gotten what he planned and was not sure yet how to hold what he got instead. He had not fought it. Once Junho had made clear he would not be moved. He had gone quiet for 2 days, and then he had shown up at dinner and been formally civil to Lillian, which was, for Lee Sung-jae, a significant gesture. He watched his son stand at the front of the garden. He watched Lillian walk across the garden toward his son. And something in his face shifted. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. The look of a man watching his son look at a woman and recognizing, reluctantly, that this was real. That this was the kind of thing he had always wanted to see and had been trying to engineer with the wrong tools. Lillian came down the aisle in ivory, simple, clean, her hair fully out and crowned with small yellow flowers that matched the ones she had once brought in from the same garden. She walked with her head up and her hands easy at her sides, and when she reached him and looked at him, her expression was the same expression she had always worn when she looked at him, direct, honest, unafraid. Junho took her hands. You look, he started. Don't get emotional, she said. I was going to say late. Junho.
Beautiful, he said.
I was going to say, beautiful.
She squeezed his hands.
He squeezed back. The officiant spoke. The words were simple. When it came time for his, Junho looked at Lillian's face and said what was true. You're the first person in a very long time who looked at me and saw me. Just me. Not the name, not the family, not the picture my father wanted. Just me.
He paused.
I did not know how much I needed that until you were standing in my room not running away when I needed you to run.
A beat.
I am going to spend a long time being grateful for your stubbornness. Lillian pressed her lips together. You are embarrassing both of us. I'm allowed. It's my wedding. She laughed. The real one. The full one from her chest, right in the middle of the ceremony, and